Ulrich Brueckner is Jean Monnet Professor of European Studies at Stanford University in Berlin, and he kindly joins me on the line now. Ulrich, if we start, let's just have a word, if we may, quickly about what's been going on in Bakhmut, because we're hearing the heads of the Wagner Group there saying that he's handing over now control to the Russian army. Is it even his to hand over at this point, and do you anticipate a counterattack coming from Ukrainian forces?
Well, I don't think anyone in the West knows what's going on behind the scene. This is part of the fog of war, in which the action is mainly a symbolic move to send a signal to the Russian public that everything is under control, that Russia has the upper hand, and this is what they want to communicate. On the other hand, we hear a lot for many months now that Ukraine is preparing a counterstrike, and if they are ready and what it means and what the possible outcomes could be is pure speculation.
I mean, this has been a fierce battle that's been fought there, but it seems like, well, it seems almost trivial when you start hearing the rhetoric coming from Dmitry Medvedev talking about possible preemptive nuclear strikes. He said if the West provides Ukraine with a nuclear weapon, Russia will make a preemptive strike. It's pretty clear what he's saying. I mean, it does raise a bigger question, though, if you don't take that too seriously, about the arms race. With the West supplying increasingly effective weaponry to Ukraine, where does this end? If the F-16 fighter jets aren't effective, what do they supply next?
Well, they certainly won't supply tactical nuclear weapons, because this is the beginning of the end. We are talking about the two largest nuclear arsenals, and this is not happening. Whenever Russia says something about nuclear, it always is addressed to the West, that people in the West who are skeptical about, will this regional conflict turn into a disaster, an Armageddon? If this is happening, then it's raising fears in the West to undermine the public support for what the West is doing for Ukraine. So this is always a play with fear, and it has nothing to do with actual facts. The West is not providing anything that could turn this whole thing into an uncontrolled conflict. The F-16 are good to have, but they're not a game changer.
However, we are seeing increasing, let's call them incursions, attacks on Russian soil. And I'm just wondering what the effects of that might be. There was the incursion in Belgorod. There was the claimed drone attack on the Kremlin, which the New York Times has just made a report saying, quoting US officials, saying that this was likely carried out by Ukraine, that attack on the Kremlin. Another claimed drone attack on a Russian warship in the Black Sea. So Russia itself coming under attack on its own territory. Does this raise the stakes? Are you fearful of what Russia might do in response?
Well, I'm fearful about everything Russia is doing, and it doesn't follow a rationale that can be calculated. This is part of their strategy. But we have to be clear about what is going on the ground. Western interests are not identical with Ukraine interests, and even within Ukraine, we have different groups or subdivisions. Ukraine appears in the media as if it is solid and everyone wants the same thing. There are certainly also groups that try to escalate the conflict to draw the West in, because that would be better for Ukraine if it would be defended by ideally NATO in their understanding. So they are not afraid of an escalation, they rather want to trigger it. And from what we read in the West is that those attacks on Russian soil are executed by Russians, like a counter army or whatever they call themselves, to challenge Putin. Is anything like a Western strategy that is coordinated with NATO? NATO is not a party of war. NATO supports Ukraine, but NATO is not acting.
Appreciate your time, Ulrich. My guest is Ulrich Brueckner, Jean Monnet Professor of European Studies at Stanford University in Berlin.